Have you ever sat in silence and asked yourself, why do I still feel them, even when they're already gone? Why does your chest still tighten when their name crosses your mind? Why do you keep checking for signs, replaying old messages, reading between lines that no longer exist, hoping that maybe this distance is temporary? Because the truth is, what hurts the most is not always the leaving. Sometimes, what destroys you is not knowing if they've truly left at all. And if you stay with me until the end, you will walk away with something most people never get after an avoidant leaves: clarity, not false hope, not emotional crumbs, real clarity, the kind that frees your mind, protects your heart, and gives your power back. Because this kind of pain is different. It is quiet, invisible, hard to explain. When someone breaks up with you clearly, there is pain, yes, but there is also an ending. But when an avoidant pulls away, they often do not give you a clean ending. They do not slam the door. They leave it half open, just enough for your mind to keep staring at it, just enough for your heart to believe there is still a chance. And that is why you are suffering more than you should. Not because love is still alive, but because uncertainty is still alive. You are not just grieving a person, you are grieving a possibility, a maybe, a story that never gave you a final page. And the human mind hates unfinished stories. It hates emotional loose ends. Psychology has shown us something powerful. The brain becomes obsessed with what it cannot fully close. What is incomplete often feels more intense than what is fully over. That is why you keep going back mentally. That is why your thoughts return to them when the room gets quiet. That is why one small memory can hit you harder than a real conversation with someone who actually loves you, because your nervous system is still trying to solve something that was never clearly explained. You are searching for an answer in a place that only gave you confusion, and confusion is dangerous when you are emotionally attached, because confusion does not feel like rejection at first. It feels like a puzzle. It feels like something you can still fix. You tell yourself they are just overwhelmed. You tell yourself they need space. You tell yourself maybe they are scared, maybe they are stressed, maybe they are fighting something inside themselves they cannot explain. And sometimes that may even be true. But here is the deeper pain. While you are trying to understand them, you are slowly abandoning yourself. You are becoming more patient with their distance than you are honest with your own wounds. That is what happens when someone leaves without really leaving. They stop showing up, but they do not fully disappear from your emotional world. Their energy lingers. Their silence speaks. Their absence becomes louder than most people's presence. And now your mind is trapped in a loop. You are not living in the relationship anymore, but you are not free from it either. You are emotionally standing in a doorway that no one is walking through, waiting, interpreting, hoping, breaking, rebuilding hope, then breaking again. And this is where most people lose themselves, not in the moment they were abandoned, but in the weeks and months after, when they start feeding themselves small lies to survive the pain. Maybe they just need time. Maybe they'll realize what they lost. Maybe if I stay calm, stay loving, stay available, they'll come back. But be careful, because hope can become a drug when it is not connected to reality. And the most dangerous kind of hope is the kind that asks you to ignore what is happening right in front of you. You start waiting for signs, a message, a like, a random return, a soft apology, a late-night confession, something, anything, because your heart would rather hold on to a little illusion than face a painful truth. That is human. That is emotional survival. But survival is not healing. And sometimes the reason you cannot move on is because a part of you is still emotionally negotiating with someone who has already emotionally withdrawn. You are trying to reopen a chapter they may have already closed in their own mind. And let's be honest about what makes this even more painful. Avoidant people often do not leave in a dramatic way. They leave in a quiet way, a cold way, a detached way, a way that makes you question your own reality. One day they are close, then suddenly they are distant. One day they make you feel chosen, then the next you feel like a burden for needing clarity. This creates something deeply painful inside you. It creates self-doubt. It makes you wonder if you asked for too much, if you loved too deeply, if your needs pushed them away. And once that self-doubt enters your system, you stop asking the most important question. Why am I fighting so hard for someone who is no longer fighting for me? That question changes everything, because the moment you ask it honestly, you begin to wake up. You begin to see that your pain is not only coming from missing them, it is coming from resisting what their behavior is already trying to tell you. Deep down, many people already know the truth long before they are ready to accept it. But acceptance feels brutal when your heart is still attached to the version of them that once made you feel safe, wanted, alive. So instead, you hold on to old moments and use them as proof that the connection is still real. But memories are not commitment. Feelings are not effort. History is not a promise. And this is the painful truth you may have been running from. Sometimes the silence is the answer. Sometimes the distance is the closure. Sometimes the lack of effort is the message. Not because you were not enough, not because you were too hard to love, but because some people would rather disconnect than do the emotional work required to stay. And if you do not face that truth, you will stay emotionally chained to someone who is no longer carrying the bond with you. So before you keep waiting, before you keep making excuses, before you keep turning their absence into a love story in your head, ask yourself one question. Am I holding on because there is real evidence, or because I am terrified to let go? Because what comes next may hurt, but it may also set you free. And once you see the one sign that changes everything, you will never look at their silence the same way again. The hardest thing to accept is this: not every person who disappears is confused. Some people are not lost. They are not overwhelmed. They are not trying to figure things out. Some people have already made a decision inside themselves, long before they ever say it out loud. And if you miss this, you will waste months, sometimes years, trying to read hope inside behavior that is actually showing you the ending. Because the clearest sign that an avoidant is not coming back is not simply silence. It is something far more painful. It is when they become emotionally unreachable and make no real effort to repair what they broke. That changes everything, because there is a difference between someone who is struggling and someone who is mentally exited. A struggling person may pull back, yes, they may need space, they may become quiet for a while, but somewhere inside that distance, there is still emotional concern. There is still some sign that the connection matters to them. There is still some form of care, ownership, or responsibility. But when someone becomes emotionally unreachable, something else has happened. They are no longer protecting the bond. They are no longer trying to preserve what was built. They are not carrying the emotional weight with you anymore. And once that happens, you are not in a difficult phase. You are standing in the ruins of something they have stopped valuing. This is where many people get trapped, because avoidants do not always leave in a way that looks final on the surface. Sometimes they still watch your stories. Sometimes they still answer after days. Sometimes they return with a random message just when you start healing. Sometimes they come close enough to stir your emotions, then disappear again before anything becomes real. And because of that, your heart keeps saying, if they didn't care, why are they still here at all? But you have to understand something that can save your life emotionally. Presence is not the same as intention. Access is not commitment. Familiarity is not love. Someone can still orbit your life without having any true plan to build a future with you. That is why so many people stay attached to false signals. They confuse occasional contact with emotional depth. They confuse curiosity with care. They confuse being remembered with being chosen. But a person who truly values you does not just appear when it is convenient for them. They do not keep you emotionally warm while remaining relationally cold. They do not leave you carrying all the uncertainty while they stay protected behind distance. Real connection has one quality that confusion never has: effort. Not perfect effort, not dramatic effort, but visible, honest, intentional effort. And this is where the truth becomes painful. When someone stops trying to understand your pain, stops trying to clear up the damage, stops trying to make things safe again, and acts as if the bond can be left broken without concern, that is not emotional fear anymore. That is emotional withdrawal. That is someone showing you that your hurt is no longer strong enough to move them toward repair. And if your pain does not move them, if your absence does not wake them, if the fracture between you does not make them want to reach for healing, then you have to ask yourself a brutal question. What exactly are you still waiting for? Because too many people hold on to the memory of who that person used to be. They keep loving an old version while ignoring the present one. They keep saying, but they were so different in the beginning. Of course they were. Most people are softer when intimacy is new and there is no emotional cost yet. But love is not measured by how someone shows up when things are easy. Love reveals itself when things become uncomfortable, when closeness asks for honesty, when conflict asks for maturity, when pain asks for repair. That is where real character appears. That is where you stop listening to words and start studying patterns. Patterns never lie. If someone repeatedly shuts down instead of speaking, escapes instead of addressing, vanishes instead of rebuilding, and treats your emotional reality like something inconvenient, then that pattern is your answer. Not the chemistry, not the memories, not the potential, the pattern. Because a relationship cannot survive on emotional possibility. It survives on emotional responsibility. And when only one person is carrying the understanding, the patience, the effort, the reflection, and the desire to fix what is damaged, then it is no longer a relationship. It is one person trying to keep a dead connection breathing. And this is exactly why your soul feels exhausted. Not because you love too much, but because you have been trying to create meaning where there is no mutual movement. You have been trying to decode someone who is no longer trying to be understood by you. You have been studying silence like it is a language of hidden love. But hidden love that never becomes safe, clear, or consistent will still destroy you. You cannot build a peaceful life on emotional guesswork. You cannot create security with someone who only shows up in fragments, and you cannot call it love if the only thing keeping it alive is your willingness to suffer. That is one of the deepest psychological traps in attachment. The human heart will often stay loyal to what hurts it if there was once enough tenderness to make the pain feel meaningful. Your mind says there had to be something real here, and maybe there was, but something being real in the past does not mean it is alive in the present. Some connections begin with sincerity and still end in emotional abandonment. Some people do feel deeply and still remain incapable of showing up in the way love requires. And that is the part many people refuse to accept. Someone can care about you and still not be able to keep you. Someone can miss you and still not choose you. Someone can think about you and still never become the person you need. That truth hurts because it removes fantasy. It strips away the romantic story your pain has been feeding on. It forces you to see that longing does not equal readiness, and emotional history does not guarantee emotional maturity. A person who is meant to stay will not just feel something for you in private. They will move toward you in reality. They will not leave you in a permanent state of emotional confusion. They will not make you guess your place in their life over and over again. If they truly want the connection, you will not have to beg life for proof every day. So pay attention to what they are not doing. Pay attention to the repair that never comes. Pay attention to the ownership that never appears. Pay attention to the effort that never becomes consistent. Because sometimes the most painful truth is also the most freeing one. They are not returning to build. They are only revisiting what they never had the courage to hold. And if you keep calling that love, you will stay trapped in a cycle that keeps your heart starving while your mind keeps inventing reasons to wait. At some point, you have to stop asking whether they still feel something and start asking whether their behavior is capable of creating peace. Because love that cannot create peace will eventually become pain you mistake for destiny. And once you understand that, you begin to see the deeper wound underneath all of this. The real reason you are still stuck is not only because of what they did, it is because of what they're leaving awakened inside you. And that is where the pain becomes even deeper, because after a certain point, this is no longer just about them. It becomes about what their distance touched inside you. It touches the fear of not being enough, the fear of being left behind, the fear that if someone can walk away so easily, then maybe your love was never worth staying for. And once that wound opens, you stop chasing only the person. You start chasing something much more dangerous. You start chasing the feeling of being chosen again. That is why so many people stay trapped far longer than they should. Not because the connection is still healthy, not because there is still something solid to hold, but because a part of them believes that if this person returns, it will erase the rejection. It will undo the humiliation. It will heal the part of them that now feels discarded. They are not only waiting for love. They are waiting for emotional relief. They are waiting for proof that they were not so easy to leave. And when you are in that state, you can confuse your wound with devotion. This is one of the most powerful things human psychology teaches us. When a painful experience attacks your self-worth, the mind does not simply want closure. It wants restoration. It wants to reverse the emotional injury. It wants to rewrite the story. That is why people keep imagining the perfect comeback, the apology, the message, the return filled with regret, because in their mind, that moment would finally make the suffering mean something. It would finally tell them, you were not abandoned because you were unlovable. But the problem is, when your healing becomes dependent on another person's return, your peace is no longer in your own hands. And that is exactly how people lose themselves. They do not always collapse in obvious ways. Sometimes they keep functioning, they go to work, they smile, they answer people, they act normal, but inwardly, they are still emotionally standing in the same place where they were left. A part of them is frozen there, still listening for footsteps that may never come, still replaying what happened, still trying to understand what they could have done differently, still building imaginary conversations in their head, still holding space for someone who has not earned that space in a very long time. That kind of waiting changes you. It slowly teaches your nervous system to live in suspense. You wake up thinking about them. You go to sleep thinking about them. You tell yourself you are trying to move on, but deep down, you are still emotionally available for their return. And because of that, nothing new can fully enter your life. Not peace, not clarity, not even genuine love. Because your inner world is still occupied by a person who is no longer showing up in a meaningful way. This is how attachment becomes a prison. Not because someone physically locked you in, but because your hope built a cage around your own heart. And hope can feel beautiful when it is attached to something alive. But when it is attached to someone emotionally unavailable, it becomes self-destruction, wearing the face of loyalty. You call it patience. You call it understanding. You call it faith. But if we are honest, much of the time it is fear. Fear that letting go means the story was meaningless. Fear that releasing them means facing the full grief. Fear that if you stop hoping, then you must finally admit they may never return in the way you wanted. And that is the moment many people avoid. Not because they are weak, but because truth can feel unbearable when your heart is still attached to fantasy. There is also something else happening underneath this that many people never realize. Emotional inconsistency creates a very powerful bond. When someone gives you closeness, then pulls away, gives warmth, then turns cold, gives attention, then disappears, your system does not settle, it becomes hyper-focused. It becomes trained to chase the next moment of relief. The less stable the connection becomes, the more intense your attachment can start to feel. And this is where many people make a painful mistake. They assume intensity means depth. They assume obsession means love. They assume constant thinking means soul connection. But often, what you are feeling is not peace, not security, not emotional health. It is your nervous system trying to survive unpredictability. That is why you cannot measure love only by how strongly you feel someone. Strong feelings can come from wounds, not just truth. You can miss someone who was wrong for you. You can ache for someone who could never hold you properly. You can feel pulled toward a person who activated your deepest fears and still call it chemistry. But chemistry without safety can become chaos. Attraction without consistency can become suffering. And longing without reality can become a lifelong delay of your own healing. So if you have been asking yourself, why can't I stop thinking about them? The answer may not be that they were your destiny. The answer may be that they activated something unfinished inside you. They touched the part of you that still wants to prove your worth through being chosen. They touched the part of you that believes love must be earned through pain, patience, sacrifice, and emotional endurance. They touched the part of you that confuses being wanted occasionally with being valued deeply. And until you face that honestly, you will keep waiting for people who make you question your place instead of honoring it. This is where your life quietly starts slipping away. Not in one dramatic moment, but in small emotional choices you make every day. Every day you delay your healing for someone who is absent. Every day you keep checking if they changed. Every day you keep feeding the version of the story that keeps you attached. Every day you refuse to accept what their actions have already shown. Every day you tell yourself, just a little more time. And without noticing it, you begin shaping your entire emotional world around a person who is not building one with you. That is not love. That is emotional starvation. That is surviving on crumbs while calling it connection. That is carrying someone in your heart who is no longer carrying you in their effort. And the longer you stay there, the more your self-respect starts fading in ways you cannot see immediately. Because every time you wait for someone who is not showing up, you send yourself a quiet message. My peace can be postponed. My needs can be delayed. My healing can wait. And over time, that becomes a pattern, a painful one.